helpful? All right.
Recording in progress.
Lovely. Okay, so what are our learning outcomes for this session? Well, to understand the importance of personal spirituality in parenting, to understand the primary purpose of the parenting relationship, and to identify the key elements of spiritual parenting. Let's start with Deuteronomy 6. I know we've looked at this passage before, but it's pertinent to what we're looking at now. The Bible says, "And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart." Um, Goes on, "You shall teach them," talking about the statutes of God, "teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up." So when we look at this passage, what strikes you about that the first section in terms of the foundation or the prerequisite for parenting? What strikes you from that? What is this passage telling us needs to be in place?
A system for explaining, discussing all of these precepts.
Yeah, so that's more in terms of the second part there, in terms of creating an environment where we share. But in what is the prerequisite in the first section there? Your relationship with God, absolutely. So, in order to pass on what God wants us to pass on, we have to love God first. So it begins with us, and then we pass on what God has given to us down to our children. And the idea of when you sit down, when you walk, when you lie down, when you rise up, it's saying that this is um, not just one day a week. This is something which is about lifestyle. This is what we live. So God shares his love to us. We respond to his love, and then his love in our hearts spreads out to those within our environment. So only spiritual parents can parent spiritually. And when we talk about spiritual parents, we're not talking about perfect people, because there are none on the planet. We're talking about people who have committed their hearts to the Lord and are allowing God to work through them. Henry Wright, one of my favorite pastors and preachers, said spirituality is that which is initiated and sustained by God. So God places his love within our hearts, and he sustains us with his Holy Spirit. So 2 Timothy 1 verse 5, the Paul says there, "I have been reminded of your sincere faith, a faith passed on from your grandmother Lois to your mother Eunice, and now to you." And coincidentally, we were speaking at the beginning about grandparenting and this idea of passing on a spiritual heritage to future generations, and this is what Paul is talking about here. This is the responsibility that we have to those who come after us, and this is why when we dedicate children. Um, the purpose of the dedication service is really not about the child per se. That while they are at the center of attention, we don't think of or we don't believe that the dedication service is akin to, say, a baptism in the Church of England or other denominations. The Catholic denomination, they see baptism as a very mystical service where some kind of spirituality is conferred on the child. But with the dedication service, the focus is on the parents, which is why, if I'm ever going to do, if I ever do a dedication, I need to go and visit with the parents and make sure that they know what is required of them, and lead them in a commitment to bring their child up in according to God's purpose. So the focus is on the parents. 3 John 1 2, Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. Matthew 7 verse 18, a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. So again, this is emphasizing the idea that we pass on what we know. We can't take people on a journey that we're not traveling ourselves, that we need to be looking after ourselves so that we can give the best to others. Our first, this is Ellen White in the book Child Guidance. She says, our first duty to God and our fellow beings is in self-development. And we get this idea, I was on a plane recently, and on every journey, they give you certain instructions. And the instruction is, remember to secure your own mask before assisting others. Now, why do they tell you that? Seems like common sense, but why do they give that instruction? Why is it important to secure your own mask before you assist other people? Anybody?
Well, if you can't, you won't be able to help anyone if you're struggling.
Yeah.
You need to make sure that you are on a firm footing, and then you can help someone else.
Yeah. It's that simple. And that principle operates in the spiritual realm as well. One of the things that we need to be careful that we don't do when we are in any kind of ministry is that we burn ourselves out. Because if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not in a position to really give of our best to other people. That's Jesus with his disciples when they went out on their missionary trip and they came back and they're all excited. And Jesus says, come ye apart and rest a while, because he knew they needed to recharge. This is the passage, Mark 6. Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while, for there were many coming and going, and they did not have anything, have time to eat. Did not even have time to eat. So, absolutely, we look after ourselves. What we pass on to our children, to a great extent, is dependent on the God that we serve. Because how we understand God and how we communicate him to others depends on our picture of who he is. So the picture we have of God determines our relationship with him, how we serve him, and how we present him to our families. So if I believe that God is this stern, harsh figure that is looking down on us, just waiting to come down on us like a ton of bricks if we step out of line, that's going to impact how I communicate who God is. And we tend to communicate who God is to our children according to how we understand him. So we can give our children a skewed, distorted picture of who God is because we have misunderstood who he is. This question is asked in the book of Job. Who is the Almighty that we should serve him? And that's a key question that we need to answer, because only as we understand him as a God of love, a God of grace, a God of compassion, can we communicate those values to our children. Here is Martin Luther, the great Protestant reformer. I think we touched on this in one of our other presentations, but here is Martin Luther saying, I have difficulty praying the Lord's Prayer because whenever I say our Father, I think of my own father who was hard, unyielding, and relentless. I cannot help but think of God in that way. When I was doing my doctoral research, I read a book called Child Spirituality by Dr. Lisa Miller, and she confirmed in her research that children generally um, place the image of their parents on their concept of who God is. So we very much shape our children's idea of who God is in the way that we relate to our children. Um, Here is a quote from the Review and Herald. Ellen White says this about Eve in the Garden of Eden. And she says that Eve believed the words of Satan and the belief of that falsehood in regard to God's character. Sorry, and her belief of that falsehood in regard to God's character changed the condition and character of both herself and her husband. So Eve was deceived. Her view of who God was changed. So before she sinned, before the enemy came along, um, she knew that God was a God of love. But what happened was that the enemy managed to distort her concept of who God was. And because she changed her understanding of who God was, it changed her own character and the character of her husband. So this is why this is so important to get a true conception of who God is. So the Bible tells us that we should be transformed by the renewing of our minds, and the renewing of our minds includes renewing the way that we see God. So one of the goals that we have, one of the primary goals we have, is to raise children who live and love with all of their hearts, wholehearted Christianity. Now, when the Bible talks about the heart, um, it's the context that tells us what it is referring to. Because when we think about the heart, we usually think in terms of the emotions. And yeah, it can involve the emotions, but the heart is a more of an all-embracing term. So, for example, it refers to the emotions in John 16, verse 22. I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice. So there's the emotions. But it also refers to conscience. For if our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart and knows all things. So there's the conscience. It refers also to the mind. But Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, "Why do you think evil in your hearts?" And it also refers to the will. He was glad and encouraged them all that with purpose of heart they should continue with the Lord. So when we talk about loving wholeheartedly, we're talking about loving God with every aspect of our humanity, our emotions, our mentality, our physicality, and also our intellect. And this is what we want to do. We want to raise children who have with a rounded education, a spiritual education that embraces every aspect of their humanity. It's not just about filling their heads with Bible texts. It's about preparing them to be able to function as Christians in a largely secular world. So the heart, somebody has said, is like the gateway of the whole being, the entrance and the exit, which is why we are told to guard our hearts. All right, so parenting, we know, is not a one size fits all, and if you are a parent and you have more than one child, you know this, you know, from experience, um, that we should love our children the same, but should we treat them the same? In fact, let me throw that out as a question. Does loving our children the same mean that we treat them the same? What do you think? Does loving our children the same mean that we should treat them all the same? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Nope.
I think you treat your children according to need and personality type.
Mm.
It's equal treatment, but depending on their personality type, need, and learning competence.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like that as a response. Because our children are not the same. You know, yeah, they have different personalities, they have different needs, they're at different ages. So we need to take all of those things into account. As much as we love our children the same, we may treat them differently, not because we're being partial, but because we're trying to meet their specific needs. So, how to parent strategies can be both seductive and dangerous, because it doesn't take into account the differences in our children, which is, you know, partly what Solomon was communicating in Proverbs 22, or that we should train up a child in the way, and the way is referring to the leaning, the bent, the personality, the uniqueness of the child. Um, the way he should go, and then when he's old, he will not depart. So put the square peg into the square hole. So we truly do stand in the place of God to our children. Um, is one of the sobering thoughts when it comes to parenting is that our children imitate us. On the one hand, that it's we want them to imitate us because we've given our lives to the Lord and we want them to follow us. But in other ways, the thought that they imitate us in some of the negative things that we do is a daunting thought. But we stand in the place of God to our children. But I am somewhat comforted by a thought that somebody shared, that we don't need to be perfect parents. We need to be good enough parents, because God is the one who steps in and makes up for our deficiencies. Our task is to set our children on the right road. I mean, my wife had a conversation with our daughter many years ago now, but she told her essentially that you know, there are things that we have passed on to you that you're going to have to wrestle with and deal with and overcome, because we are not perfect people. And this is the reality. We are not perfect, but we are striving. Paul says this, and he's speaking to the those who are young in the faith in the Corinthian church, and he says to them, "Imitate me, just as I also imitate Christ." Now, I wish I had that kind of confidence. You know, he had to be a man who was secure in his Christianity, secure in his commitment to Christ, to say boldly to other people, "Look, you look at me. You know, I am living my life according to God's will. I'm following the Lord. So you just follow me and imitate the things that I do, and you'll be on the right track." And And really, this is what we should be able to communicate to our children, not necessarily verbally, but by our deportment, by the way we live our lives. Um, we're saying, look at me. This is what Christianity is all about. So until they get to the point where they can make their own choices, we are the ones who sets the tone. We give them the example of who God is. It's a daunting task, but it's also a great privilege. So our role as parents is akin to the role of John the Baptist. John the Baptist's primary role was to prepare the way for the coming of the Lord. That was his mission, and that's our mission as parents. We are preparing the ground for our children to accept the Lord when God makes his appeal to their hearts directly. Now, many years ago, there was a survey done in Europe called Value Genesis. It was done amongst Adventist youth across Europe. And I mention it now, even though it's so old. I mention it now because it was done amongst Adventist youth, and I think the principles that came out of that Value Genesis still hold true today, and in a broader context, in terms of the relationship between parents and their young people. But young people who have regular exchanges with their father about faith issues are 70% more likely to see themselves as Adventists in the future than those who don't. And I find that was an interesting finding from the Value Genesis. And it's not just about fathers. There's other research that shows generally that young people who have conversations with their parents and who are trusting of their parents' wisdom, they tend to be more likely to remain in church and to remain faithful to their parents' values. And that's a reflection of what God wants for his children. Here in Proverbs 2, Solomon says, "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God." So, the challenge for parents is to be the voice of wisdom, not only to have wisdom and spiritual maturity, but also to be the safe place, because our children will not listen to us if they don't feel that we are safe people, if we have not communicated to them that that we can be trusted, that we are infinitely interested in their well-being. But when we are that kind of safe individual, our children will listen to us, and when that happens, that's a real blessing. Okay, so looking at parental strategies, George Barna, I think it was, in his book Raising Spiritual Champions, talks about the way that parents raise their children. And he identifies two types of ways. One is by default, and one is by trial and error. So default says, my parents did it this way, so I'm going to do it this way. We just repeat the way that our parents parented us. We don't really question it. We just accept that what they did was the right thing to do, and we kind of replicate that. We are programmed into thinking that this is the way we do it because this is the only example that we saw. When it comes to trial and error, people might say, well, you know what? My parents brought me up this way and I didn't like it, so I'm going to do it this way. And we try different things. And Barna talks about the goal for parenting really is about parenting by biblical principles, which he calls revolutionary parenting because it goes against the grain of society's values in principle. And he says that the goal for default or trial and error is success. Success equals survival. We just want to get our children into adulthood so that they can survive in the big bad world out there. But he says the goal of revolutionary parenting by biblical principles, is transformation. It's about helping our children to experience their own personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So the goal of parenting is survival, independence, and this is what would generally, whether Christian or secular, these are the kind of things that parents want for their children. They want them to be able to survive in the world. They want them to be independent. They want them to be competent. They want them to learn the skills of problem solving, to have a good sense of morality, to have a good religious life. And all of these are built into good character. So character is built by teaching moral principles and meeting emotional needs. And Ellen White supports this idea where she says in the book Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, that the thoughts and feelings combined make up the moral character. The thoughts and feelings combined make up the moral character. And that's an important concept to understand and appreciate, because if that's the case, we need to be very careful about what we feed into our minds. And we need to learn how to both understand and regulate our emotions effectively, because these combined help us to become the people who will either spend time in eternity with the Lord or otherwise. Again, Adventist Home. And this is Ellen White talking about the type of parent that we should be. She says that if the parents would enter more fully into the feelings of their children and draw out what is on their hearts, it would have a beneficial influence upon them. So let me throw out the question. What does it mean? What do you think she means when she says we should enter into the feelings of our children? What does that mean? How do you do that? What does it mean to enter into the feelings of children? And how does that happen?
The word empathy comes to mind.
Mm-hmm. And what is empathy?
Putting ourselves in the shoes of.
Yeah.
Trying to appreciate
Yeah.
the experience of another.
Brilliant. Yeah. You've hit the nail on the head. Empathy is, the Native Americans have this saying that do not judge a man until you have walked 2 moons in his moccasins. So you step into somebody else's shoes means that you see the world from their perspective. And that can be challenging for us to do with children because we were children a long time ago. But when we enter into the feelings of our children, it's about trying to see the world from their perspective. It's about spending time with them. It's about listening to them. Um, and then she talks about draw out what is on their hearts. So sometimes we need to be assertive and to be persistent in terms of um, giving them the opportunity to share what's on their hearts, because sometimes through fear or embarrassment or shame, our children can want to just close up and keep things to themselves. So sometimes it requires a little probing to get them to open up, draw out what is on their hearts. And she says, and when they do that, it would have a beneficial influence on them. So it's important that our children have an outlet for the emotions that they experience. One of the most harmful things that we can do is to create an environment where our children feel that they have to suppress their emotions. And that can happen when we are emotion disapproving or emotion dismissing, when we don't treat children's emotions with validation and affirmation, even if we consider them to be, in quotes, negative emotions, then they can learn to suppress them, and that can be harmful. All right, so when does spiritual training begin? When does spiritual training begin? The Catholics have this saying, give me the child until he is 7 and I'll show you the man. Ellen White says that obedience to parental authority should be inculcated in babyhood. So, what do you think that means? How do you inculcate obedience into a child in babyhood? What do you think she's alluding to?
Personality while you're carrying the child to start with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that kind of goes back to what we were talking about in terms of we being spiritual individuals, looking after our own self, and if we are a confident individual, that will be communicated to our children.
Mark Finley, there was a lovely sermon that he gave, which he spoke about. They were trying to recover children, Jewish children, from an orphanage, and it was a Catholic orphanage. And the rabbis went and they asked questions, and they were told, "No, we don't have any Jewish children." But then the rabbis went back in the evening, and they began to sing the Shema, and the Jewish children began to cry.
Wow.
Because it was just as you said, inculcated.
Yeah.
From inception.
Yeah.
Inception.
Yeah, brilliant. That's a lovely anecdote, and it makes the point that we can't start too soon. We cannot start too soon. In fact, Ellen White talks about prenatal influence. So even before the child is born, the environment in which the mother is operating can adversely affect the child in the womb. And you speak to any mother who has given birth, and she can give examples of how she operated before the child was born influenced their child, whether it's through the music that they enjoy or through the food that they enjoy. The idea of prenatal influence is very strong. All right, so while our formative years have a powerful influence on who we are, they do not negate the power of conversion. Now, I make that point for a couple of reasons. We spent some time in one of our previous presentations looking at attachment theory. And attachment theory teaches that the ways of relating that we learn through our communication with our primary caregiver sets the pattern for how we relate to people later in life. There is also the research done by George Barna. I've mentioned him before. That children's worldview is basically shaped by the age of 14. That the worldview that a child has at 14 more than likely will be the worldview that they die with. But that does not negate the power of conversion. It doesn't mean that whatever worldview they have adopted, if the secular worldview, that cannot be reversed. And it's important to appreciate that because as Christians, we are in the business of change. Revelation 3 verse 12, God says, I will also write on them my new name. And that's God placing his character on people. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away, behold, all things have become new. So even if our children grow up and they haven't embraced the Lord as their Lord and Savior, it doesn't mean that change cannot happen, and we should continue to pray, continue to share God's love, continue to witness to them, and create that safe environment where they can see God's love in operation. Yeah. So, where do we get our model for effective parenting? Well, God is the one who sets the pattern. You know, he is our Father. It's called that for a reason. And the Bible says, as a father has compassion on his children, those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. How much more will the Heavenly Father give? So it is not by accident that God is described in terms of being a father. It is not by accident that God describes throughout the Bible, he describes his relationship with his people in terms of family relations, in terms of marriage, in terms of parenting, because he is the one who sets the pattern for how we should be relating to our children. Ephesians 6 verse 3, and you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. So Paul is saying here that it's possible for parents, he's speaking specifically about fathers, but I guess it's true of mothers as well, that we can relate to our children in a way that generates anger within them. We can provoke our children. But it is interesting that the same Paul uses a similar phrase, but with a different emphasis, where he says in Colossians 3 and verse 21, fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. And what I draw from that is that, you know, provocation can have a different effect on different children. It goes back to what we were saying before about treating children differently. Our children have different personalities, and some will respond to different in different ways. So if you have, for example, an abusive father, that may lead to a child becoming angry and resentful and rebellious and even violent. But the same parent can have a child who, as a result of the abuse, becomes reserved and who goes into a shell and becomes fearful. Um, Similar or same level of abuse, but a different reaction because the children are different. So again, from the negative standpoint, it kind of emphasizes the point that we made before that our children are very different and they may respond to similar stimulation in different ways. So the challenge that we have in parenting is to love, but to love within limits. Again, we looked previously in a previous presentation on attachment about the different parenting styles, and we identified the authoritarian parenting style and the laissez-faire, where you just let your kids do whatever they want to do, and there's no particular boundaries that are placed on them. Then there is the emotion coaching, where we impose effective limits, loving limits. So there are different parenting styles, and the challenge that we have is one of balance. Proverbs 23 verse 13 says, "Withhold not correction from the child." Hebrews 12, "For what son is not disciplined by his father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are illegitimate children and not true sons." So let me sorry. Let me pose this question. We're familiar with the terms discipline and oftentimes when we think about discipline, some of us immediately think in terms of physical chastisement. And we'll come on to discuss that in a moment. But the contrast between, do you see a difference between discipline and punishment? Is there a difference between discipline and punishment in terms of the way that we relate to children? What is the difference, if there is one, between discipline and punishment?
Discipline has an explanation.
Okay. So you say punishment doesn't have an explanation?
Punishment is about giving pain for wrongdoing, whereas discipline is helping the child to learn from that wrongdoing towards self-management and self-governance.
Okay, so are you saying that discipline doesn't involve pain?
It may involve pain, but not for its own sake. Whereas punishment
right.
is, well, God is the only judge, and we're meant to be reflecting God to our children. And we need to, I used to say to my children, I will tell you once, I'll tell you twice. The third time you will get blue. But
okay.
it's only last week
right.
I read this, that word for today, and it said children should not be punished; they should be disciplined.
Okay.
I said, oh, that's a different concept.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, let's tease this out. So the two seem to be related, but how do we achieve balance between the two? Let's press on a little, and we'll tease this out. So when it comes to discipline, the ultimate goal of parental discipline is character building. So punishment is about retribution. You did something wrong and you should suffer the consequences of it. And that may be an element of discipline, because our children need to know that there are consequences that go along with bad choices. But discipline, the primary purpose, is about character building. Cher mentioned about explanation, and that's an important part of discipline. Our children need to know why they are experiencing the consequences of what they are doing. If they do something wrong, we punish them, but we don't let them know why they are being punished. Then that's a bit pointless. If we are interested in their growth, then we need to show them why what they did was wrong. So again, Hebrews 12:11, no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, after it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. So obviously, no child involved enjoys being punished. And at times we have to be the bad guy. And one of the problems with parenting in this day and age is that sometimes parents don't want to be the bad guy, and so they don't impose appropriate discipline because they don't want the children to feel bad. But it's important to appreciate that our children won't like us all the time. You know. But that goes with the territory for us as parents. The most important thing is that we apply those loving principles and loving discipline. So discipline is training designed to produce a specific character or pattern of behavior. All right, so let's look at this, the physical punishment. Is it okay to beat children? Is this something that is permissible? When we were going to have children, myself and my wife, we grew up in different homes. So my dad would beat us at the drop of a hat. If he came out home with a bad mood, he'll find a reason to take the belt off. And he was a very violent, abusive father. So it was just par for the course, getting beaten in my household. My wife grew up in a household where she was never, I think she remembers maybe one occasion where her mum gave her a tap and it turned out to be for something that she didn't do. So we had this different concept of physical discipline. For her, she was saying, no, never under any circumstances whatsoever should we ever beat our children. And I'm saying, yeah, it's a tool in the armory. It's not necessarily your first resort, but you have that as an option. I'll tell you how we work that out in a minute, but let me throw that out. Is there a place for physical chastisement in parenting? What say you?
My experience, Pastor, is a bit like your wife's. I might have had one or two, one or two taps, but most of the time it was a discussion, and it might have been a lengthy one. What should we do about this then? So I had to give a contribution as to what I thought should happen.
Yeah. So are you of the position that you should never? Let me not focus on you, but let me throw that out. What do we think? Is there a place for physical chastisement?
Good morning, everyone. This is Jacob from Bristol office.
Yes, sir.
Bristol Bush. Let's be biblical about this. I grew up in a family where you make enemies, you become naughty. My mother will give it to you as a dessert. But my father is always very, very, very gentle. We ended up respecting our father more than we do to our mom. My father used to tell my mom that the more you beat them, the more that beating becomes irrelevant, and they will grow a resistance to it. And that was what happened. But let's go by biblical now. The Bible says that stubbornness in the heart of a child, and it takes a spanking to remove it. But it all depends on our intention, our mindset. If we do that genuinely in love to correct them with minimal efforts, not bullying them or abusing them, I think God Himself permitted it to some extent. But now we live in an environment where it's completely against the law, and God says respect constitutional authority. So the law is one side, the Bible, God's instructions on the other side, and by my learning from the church, God's instructions supersede man's instructions. But then it all comes down to doing that in love. And sometimes it doesn't have to be spanking them with cane or physical effort. There's some other ways you can use to discipline them to make them realize that what they've done is wrong. But to me, my understanding is not completely a sin or incorrect for me to apply what my Bible teaches me. Thank you.
Okay, there's a lot in there. There's a lot in there. Thank you very much. I think it is true that if you overuse physical discipline as a tactic, it can lose its significance. That's absolutely possible. You mentioned the law, and the law is different in the UK. So in Scotland, for example, you cannot physically chastise your children. In the UK, in England, England and Wales, you can physically chastise children, but you can't use an implement and you can't leave a mark. So there's leeway there in the English law. But then there's the biblical position, and let's look at what the biblical position is. And somebody has put one of those passages in, and Davidson's put one of those passages in the chat. Spare the rod, spoil the child. In fact, let me go to the passage and then come back to that. Do not withhold correction from the child, for if you beat him with a rod, he will not die. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell. Now, going back, the rod, looking at Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, the rod referred to like a staff or the staff, or it was called the shebet, and the shebet was a rod, which refers to a branch, an offshoot, staff, club, shepherd's implement, truncheon, scepter, which conjures up a horrific image if you're thinking about using a truncheon against a child. But when the Bible is talking about spare not the rod, there's a statement. No one reasonably believes that this passage advocates beating children with a truncheon. So most likely it's talking about a branch or something akin to a cane. But Ellen White says this. She says, frequently one such correction will be enough for a lifetime to show the child that he does not hold the lines of control. So I think Cornelius is correct. The Bible allows for physical discipline as an option. Ellen White refers to it as something that should be used very sparingly. And if you read further in Child Guidance what she says about physical discipline, she says it should be the last resort. It should be done in love. It should be done after prayer, which suggests that it should not be done as an emotional reaction to a child's misbehavior, because then that's just us lashing out because of our own lack of emotional regulation. So she's suggesting that it should be done after a period of prayer, which means you are very calm when you do it. And somebody said that can be even more frightening for a child. She talks about a period of restoration. So once physical discipline is used, there needs to be this period of rebuilding and healing the relationship. And she also talks about joint prayer with the child. Now, obviously, this is going to be age dependent upon how much the child can actually understand about the dynamics of what is going on. But because we're not given specific ages of where you can do what, so we need to use our best common sense, and more importantly, have our actions and our decisions informed by God's Spirit working on our hearts. So yeah, it is not a hard and fast thing, but it is a we need to keep in mind that the primary goal of any discipline is the growth of the child. And the bottom line is that whatever form of discipline we choose to utilize, whether it's physical discipline, whether it's withdrawal of privileges, whether it's timeouts, whether it's sending children to their room, whatever it is, any form of discipline can become abusive if it is carried too far. So we really do need to have the Spirit of God leading us and guiding us in our disciplining. Okay, let's move swiftly. I will send you Elijah the prophet. So we're now looking at the emotional and spiritual nurture of our children. I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers. So the Bible speaks in Malachi about the last day message. And it's significant that within the last day message is a message that heals relationships, that brings fathers and children together. And I think it is, for me, as a family ministry leader, it is so important for us to keep in mind that whatever our last day message is, and there are some serious stuff that we preach in terms of what's going to happen in the last days, that the relational element is also always to the forefront. We are looking at building relationships with people and healing relationships between people. Joel 2:28, and afterward I will pour my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, and your young men will see visions. And I think we, as parents, and not just parents, we're talking about mentors as well. We who have responsibility and influence over young people need to see the potential in young people. Because if young people can experience conversion, then they can also become involved in ministry. And it's important to create ministry opportunities for them to be able to serve. Mentioned George Barna a few times, and his Barna Group research, excellent source of material and resources for you to access. Just check out the Barna Group. He did, I listened to him give a talk live at a conference. It may have been a Christian resource exhibition, but he spoke on evangelism. And he said he did a body of research. And when he completed the research, he was skeptical about the results. And so he said he threw out the research, started from scratch, did it all over again, and it came up with the same result. And he said the research was about what is the most effective form of evangelism. And the result was that the most effective form of evangelism is ministry to our children. Now, if Barna is correct, and the most effective form of evangelism is ministry to our children, that has implications on how we organize our churches, on where we put our resources. Because at the moment within the Adventist Church, the most effective form of evangelism is still the evangelistic campaign. That's where we are bringing in the most amount of new converts. But what Barna is saying was, if we did our job right, if all we did as a church was hold our children, our membership would be far, far greater than it is at the moment, if we just were able to hold our children. And let's face it, parenting is evangelism, because our children are not born Seventh-day Adventists. They have to come to a point where they receive Jesus Christ as personal Savior. So that parenting is a form of evangelism. It is a form of discipleship. So according to the research, parents typically have no plan for the spiritual development of their children. It's what Barna says in his book, Transforming Children into Spiritual Champions. Don McLafferty, who created the Kids in Discipleship ministry, and I was fortunately one of I was the first pastor of a church that was the first church to train and to utilize the Kids in Discipleship ministry in Europe. We went over to America and were trained by Don McLafferty. And during the training, he posed a question. He said, "The enemy has plans for your children. Do you?" And that question is just stuck in my mind. The enemy has plans for your children. Do you? Our children do not come to faith by accident. And if the enemy is working hard to destroy our children's faith, we need to be intentional about preserving it. So Ellen White says that every family is a church over which the parents preside. The first consideration of parents should be to work for the salvation of their children. Now, in terms of the home being a church, we should see similarities between the two. So what similarities should there be between the home and the church? There was research done by a guy called Christian Schwartz, who wrote a book called Natural Church Development. And he identified certain characteristics, and among those characteristics were empowering leadership, passionate spirituality, loving relationships, gift discovery, and service and outreach. All of these things should be seen within the family context, because parenting is leadership. If we are not, as parents, passionate about our faith, why would we expect our children to be? Loving relationships is what Christianity is all about. The home is where gift discovery should begin. And we should be giving our children opportunities to be involved in service, because if we don't, why would we expect them all of a sudden, when they reach their own age of accountability, should we expect them all of a sudden to get involved in outreach in the church if we have not nurtured that within the home? Aristotle says that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellent, then, is not an act, but a habit. Fathers and mothers, however pressing your business, do not fail to gather your family around God's altar. So Ellen White is saying that, look, we need to be proactive. We need to develop a habit of spirituality within our homes. So family worship, key element of raising spiritual children. And family worship should entertain and inspire. And I put that word entertain intentionally because entertainment is often seen as a dirty word in the church. When you hear about entertainment, all they want is entertainment. Well, the word entertainment in its original meaning simply means to hold the attention. And we should be striving to hold the attention. That our services should be such that people are engaged and we hold their attention and we keep them interested. And that requires creativity. It requires thought. It requires planning. If you just turn up and you haven't really planned and the worship is boring, why would we expect anybody, let alone our children, why would we expect anybody to want to be part of that? True worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. So our worship should engage our emotions, but it should also engage our minds. It's a balance between the two. Boring worship is boring worship. Worship should not only inform, but it should also inspire. And that's what I mean. We need to be planning our services so that people look forward to attending and enjoying as opposed to enduring. So family worship should never be monotonous or ritualistic. And a key element to family worship is fun. That's another dirty word sometimes in the church. It's okay to have fun, especially with children, because children learn best when their emotions are engaged. And when we are enjoying ourselves, God's organized our brains such that this part of the brain called the hippocampus, responsible for the recording of emotional memory, helps us to record memory. So when our events are attached to emotions, we remember them more easily. So it's important for our children to have fun. Ellen White says, let the services be brief and full of life, adapted to the occasion. So no long drawn out readings from the spirit of prophecy and everlasting prayers. That we need to keep it brief, keep it to the point, and keep it exciting. So the purpose of the family worship: connection with God, connecting to each other, and creating the expectation that God will act in and through us. So the components of family worship: praise and thanks. So we should be, we give God praise for who he is, and we thank him for what he has done. Prayer, another important element. Ellen White says prayer is the opening of the heart to God as to a friend. And it's important in terms of prayer. We do not open our hearts to somebody that we don't feel safe with. So our children won't feel safe praying what's on their hearts if they don't feel safe in our company. Bible reading, and I say Bible reading as opposed to Bible study, because Bible reading is devotional, primarily about transformation as opposed to just simply gaining information. Connecting. So modeling appropriate openness and vulnerability gives children permission to do the same. So this is where we are being vulnerable. We are being open. We are modeling to our children that it is okay to share emotions, and then sharing. So the mission of the home, Ellen White says, extends beyond its own members. So what happens in our family worship should result in outreach, should make a difference in terms of what happens when we are outside of our homes. So I mentioned the idea of Bible reading. The primary purpose of Bible reading is to lead us to the heart of God. And here it's a key element in terms of outreach, and we'll take a break in just a moment. Children of 8, 10, or 12 years are old enough to be addressed on the subject of personal religion. Do not teach your children with reference to some future period when they shall be old enough to repent and believe. If properly instructed, young children may have a correct view of their state as sinners and of the way of salvation through Christ. So the important point here is that if children can experience conversion, and we believe what Paul says in Corinthians, that every Christian is given at least one spiritual gift, then our children are gifted by God when they give their hearts to Him. And if they are gifted, and the purpose of a spiritual gift is for the purpose of outreach, then we need to create the opportunities for them to get involved in outreach. Otherwise, we stifle their giftedness. The Spirit of God will come upon the children, and they will do a work in the proclamation of the truth, which the older workers cannot do. I think that's key. You know, if we want young people to be reached, we need to empower young people to reach them. And then finally, we who cut mere stones must always be envisioning cathedrals. So the idea is that, you know, when we are doing the ordinary mundane things of parenting, we should always keep in mind that our primary purpose is to create candidates for the kingdom. Okay, that's the end of the presentation. Anybody have any, before we break, any questions or observations? Any clarifications?
I have a few things that I wanted to say.
Yes.
I noticed that I know we're talking about young people and children. Obviously, they have the various age groups. Now, I'm aware that regarding when I'm looking at the various sexes of the children, the boys versus the girls, girls have a tendency to like sitting down and observing such and such. But with the boys, they like to be active. Yeah. They don't like to be sitting down all the time. But I do find in the church setup that they do. I do find in the church setup is that you're geared in a particular way. If we do certain things like this and we do certain things like that, and we do not encourage the children to exert their energies, and through their energies you can get more productivity out of the children. So that is one area that I'm thinking about. Yeah. And also just stringing the pendulum. We've also got church buildings. It's just a thought that's come to my head. A large period of time, those buildings are closed. We can use those buildings at a certain time during the daytime to encourage people with young children to come into the building. Yeah. I don't know, maybe do certain activities to encourage them. There's various opportunities out there, but I feel that with the church, you're set in a certain way. Yes, I understand that there are people that might be working and they can't always avail their time but there are people that might be free, that might be unemployed, and maybe they can use those time to I'm trying to think of the right word. You know, like if rather than stay at home and feeling sorry for yourself, you haven't got a job, maybe you can utilize the time to use it productively. Engage the public. You know, for us to reach those who do not know Christ.
What you're suggesting there is actually happening in quite a few of our churches. For example, Stanborough Park have a regular toddlers group that is attended by members of the general public, and I like, one of the things I like about Stanborough is that they're open practically 7 days a week. You know, there is something going on that the public can access, and we need to see that more with many of our churches. Going back to the first point that you made in terms of children and the boys and the girls, absolutely. My son was when he was at school, this is one of the things that we raised with them, because he was very kind of hyperactive is the wrong word. Found it difficult to concentrate simply by sitting. And so the school were very good, because they allowed him to get up and move around while the lessons were going on. And it wasn't a distraction. You know, it wasn't like he was creating a problem. It's important for us to utilize the materials that we have. And we've got a new curriculum that's in the offing coming up. And even with GraceLink, the materials are excellent, but it requires teachers who are willing to utilize them to the maximum. And that means getting children involved in different activities, taking on board different learning styles, because not every child will learn the same. So but all of that requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of time, effort, creativity, and some churches don't have the people resource to be able to do that. So the points you raised, excellent. We should be doing more of that in terms of utilizing our churches as potential for bringing people into contact with the gospel. All right, I am mindful that our time is going. We've got one question about family worship. How can we make family worship with our young adult children who are still at home with us? Again, it requires creativity. The best resource that we have is the Bible itself. And it's important to get to know your children. You know, going back to what it says in Proverbs, train up a child in the way that they should go. And then tailor the worship according to the interests of the children. So there is no kind of black and white answer that we can give for this question. When it comes to family worship, we need to know our children, be mindful of their different ages and their requirements, and then tailor our worship according to what will keep their interest. Yeah. Okay, what else have we got in the chat? From Super, how can I get this recording? We will make the recording available, not the recording. All right, email me and we'll see what we can do to make the actual recording available. We may simply put it on the family ministry website, but we'll see how we can do that. But my email I will put in the chat, and then you can contact me directly. Today's program says marriage, strength, and emotion. Yeah, we had to shift because we cancelled the last program I mentioned at the beginning because I had an accident, and we had to cancel the last training. So we've just moved them down. So marriage and strengthening and emotional intelligent communication will be the next session. All right. We're going to take a break now in preparation for the next session. Let's take 10 minutes. It's now 26 minutes past. Let's come back at 22. Give you a chance to get a drink and take a break. And we'll start back at 20 to 12.
Recording stopped.
And this session, we're looking at sacred sexuality. Just to note that if you need resources for worship or resources in general when it comes to family or children's ministries, visit the BUC website. Check out the website. There are lots of downloadable resources that are on there. Just go to adventist.uk and go to family ministries, children's ministries. Check out both the North England Conference and the South England Conference, and see what resources are available there. But yeah, there are materials there that you can use for worship with children at different ages. In terms of teens, Karen Holford produced an excellent series of studies for teens, and this was a supplement to the Kids in Discipleship ministry materials. So that when children got to about the age of 14 or so, which was the kind of upper limit for kids in discipleship, there was a bit of a gap. They wanted to know, what can we do from here? Well, Karen Holford produced an excellent series of studies which are on the Family Ministries, Children's Ministries website, which you can download for free. So please feel free to visit there and just check out the resources that are available. All right, we're looking at sacred sexuality. Yeah.